My name is Claire Weston. I'm 29 and I remember the exact moment my world stopped turning. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows tragedy, it was louder than that. The kind that roars in your ears when your spine cracks against concrete and your legs don't respond anymore. I remember lying there sprawled on the cold patio at my parents' backyard, surrounded by laughter. Not concern, not horror, just laughter. My older brother Mason was standing above me, red Solo cup in one hand, a smug grin curling on his face. "Nice fall, Claire," he chuckled, nudging his buddies with his elbow. "Should have been a gymnast, huh?" Everyone laughed. Everyone but me, because I couldn't move. Not my legs, not my hips, not even my toes. I opened my mouth trying to speak, but my breath came out in shallow gasps. Panic clenched my chest as the pain flared up my spine like an electric shock. My hands fumbled at my waist trying to find anything. Feeling, control, something, nothing. My voice cracked. I can't move. Mason crouched beside me and rolled his eyes. "Drama queen. You tripped Claire. Get up. You're embarrassing yourself." But I couldn't. That's what no one understood. My father, Richard Weston, came rushing out from the house, not with concern, but fury. "What the hell is going on out here?" he barked. "Claire, get up. We've got neighbors watching. Don't start your theatrics today. It's your brother's birthday." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But the weight in my chest wasn't just from injury. It was from something far more familiar being dismissed. For the record, this wasn't the first time I had been ignored. But this time, the price wasn't my pride, it was my body. They wouldn't believe me. Not then, not yet. But one day soon, they'd have no choice. Because what happened next would take the betrayal I had lived with for years and put it in handcuffs. And if you've ever had a moment where your pain was downplayed, where your truth was shrugged off as drama, then you know how deep that betrayal runs. If that's ever been you, even once leave a like, and stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story, it might be yours too. I wasn't supposed to come to Mason's party. I had declined twice when Mom called earlier that week. But then came the guilt-tripping text, "He's your brother." You know how much appearances mean in this neighborhood. Don't make us look divided. Appearances. Always appearances. It had always been about how things looked, never how they felt. Our house, nestled in an affluent corner of Louisville, Kentucky, was the kind people took photos of during the holidays. Neatly trimmed hedges, perfect white shutters, 2 golden retrievers. Picture perfect. Except behind the doors was a family that ignored pain like it was contagious. Still, I agreed to go. I don't even know why anymore. Maybe I wanted to believe things had changed. Maybe I hoped Mason had grown up. Maybe I was tired of always being the one who said no. So I arrived on time dressed in a navy blouse and Flat's hair pulled back in the neat ponytail my mother always insisted suited my face. I brought a $100 gift card tucked into a generic happy birthday card. I didn't expect gratitude. I just wanted peace. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift in the air. It was like returning to a job you quit for a reason. The same tension, the same unspoken hierarchy. Mason was the king. I was the problem child who never smiled right in pictures. He greeted me with a half hug and a joke about me finally showing up for something, and his friends roared like it was the best line of the night. I smiled, said nothing, and slipped away toward the drink table. I lasted 90 minutes before it all went wrong. It was during the backyard toast. Mason had just finished bragging about a new truck Dad bought him. Everyone was laughing. I started to step back inside to grab my purse, and that's when it happened. One step onto the wooden deck slicker than it should have been, and my feet flew out from under me like I'd stepped on ice. The world flipped. Sky, ground, pain, and then nothing. They thought I was being dramatic. Again. They didn't realize that this time, they were wrong. They didn't realize I wasn't going to walk it off. They didn't realize someone, maybe Mason, had poured something on the deck. And they didn't realize what ignoring me would cost them. Not yet. But they would. 'Cause sometimes pain makes you silent. And sometimes it makes you unstoppable. And if you've ever felt that shift between being dismissed and being determined, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. You never know who you'll help by sharing. Growing up in the Weston household meant knowing that love had conditions. It wasn't about kindness or warmth, it was about obedience, image, and silence. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My father, Richard, ran a mid-sized real estate firm and prided himself on being a man's man, grilling on Sundays, golf on Saturdays, and zero tolerance for what he called emotional nonsense. My mother, Evelyn, kept the house like it was on display for a magazine spread, and she played the role of socialite housewife with cold precision. Then there was Mason, my older brother, by 4 years. Tall, athletic, charming in the most dangerous way. He was the golden boy, captain of the football team prom king, and later the heir apparent to my father's firm. From the moment he could talk, he was told he could do no wrong, and he believed it. And me, I was the mistake my parents made when they decided to have just one more. Quiet, bookish, too sensitive. Or at least that's what they told me. I remember being 6 years old when I first realized that in our house, truth didn't matter, perception did. Mason had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. When I told Mom what I saw, she narrowed her eyes and said, "Claire, you must have misunderstood. Mason said it wasn't him, and you need to stop making up stories." That one sentence became the template for my childhood. You must have misunderstood. Stop being dramatic. You always look for attention. I internalized those phrases until they felt like facts. By the time I was a teenager, Mason's behavior had escalated beyond mischief. He tampered with my laptop the night before my final project was due. He stole my keys and hid them just to make me late for school. He spread rumors at church about how I'd been caught with a boy at the movies, none of which were true. Each time I brought it up to our parents, the result was the same. Mason said it didn't happen. Why are you always so negative? Why can't you be more like your brother? And Mason knew it. That was the worst part. He wasn't just cruel, he was calculated. He understood that as long as he smiled in front of Dad and said yes ma'am to Mom, he could do whatever he wanted. And I learned to shrink, to question myself, to keep my head down and my mouth shut. I moved out the moment I turned 18. I got a scholarship to a state university in Indiana and packed everything I owned into my old Honda Civic. When I crossed the state line, I remember feeling something close to freedom. I promised myself I'd only return for the big stuff, Thanksgiving maybe, weddings, and yes, birthdays. But even then, I set rules. I wouldn't stay the night. I wouldn't drink. I wouldn't allow myself to be cornered by Mason. And yet boundaries only matter when the people around you respect them. That's the thing about emotional abuse. People think if there are no bruises, there's no damage. But the bruises just went inward. Over the years, they turned into panic attacks before family events, nightmares about being trapped at home again, a constant second-guessing of my own reality. It wasn't until I was 24 and started seeing a trauma therapist that I even had a word for what I'd lived through: invalidation. Constant, methodical invalidation. The slow erosion of my confidence, my voice, my right to be believed. My therapist once asked me, "Claire, when you think about your parents, what do you feel first?" And without thinking, I said tension in my chest. That's the legacy I carried back with me when I walked into Mason's backyard birthday bash. And that's why as I laid on that patio floor, unable to move my legs, hearing my mother hiss through gritted teeth, "Don't ruin this day, Claire," I wasn't shocked. I was used to being silenced. But that day, something shifted. Not in them, in me. 'Cause this time, I wasn't a confused teenager. I wasn't a powerless little girl. This time, I had something they couldn't explain away: a body that wouldn't move, a witness who saw the fall, and eventually a truth so undeniable it would break through even the thickest wall of denial. And if you've ever lived in a home where the silence hurt more than words, where truth was twisted and your voice erased, just know you're not crazy. You're not alone. Leave a comment below. Share where you're from. I promise you, your story matters. By the time I was 12, I had stopped reporting Mason's cruelty to my parents. What was the point? Every time I spoke up, it backfired. Once when I was 9, Mason locked me in the attic for nearly 3 hours. I had been terrified, crying, pounding on the door, certain something was watching me in the shadows. When my mom finally let me out, I was hysterical. I told her what happened, but she just folded her arms and said, "You're too old to be scared of the dark, Claire. Maybe next time don't exaggerate." Mason stood behind her, arms crossed, smirking. That look, the self-satisfied grin of someone who knows the game is rigged in their favor, still haunts me. That night I sat in my bed with a flashlight under the covers, not because I needed it, but because it made me feel like I had some control over my world. It became my secret ritual. One light I could turn on when the rest of the house refused to see me. In high school, things got worse. When I was 15, Mason stole my private journal, photocopied a page about a boy I had a crush on, and posted it on the bulletin board at school. I was humiliated. My classmates laughed. One even read it aloud in gym class. I cried in the locker room for 20 minutes. When I confronted him at home, Mason shrugged. It was a joke. Get over yourself. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. Don't be so sensitive. You're giving him power when you react. And that was the message over and over again. It's your fault for reacting, not his for doing it. By the time I was 17, Mason had everyone convinced I was emotional, unstable, needy. He once spilled coffee on my laptop the night before midterms, then told our parents I'd been clumsy. I failed 2 assignments that week. My mom gave me a lecture about taking responsibility. He sabotaged me again and again, but I stopped fighting back. I stopped explaining. I stopped asking anyone to take my side, because I already knew no one would. When I turned 18, I packed my things into that same Civic, drove across the state, and never looked back. I made a life for myself. Rented a small apartment above a bakery, worked part-time as a tutor, enrolled in college full-time. It was hard, but it was mine. I found new friends, people who saw me. I started therapy. I learned phrases like gaslighting and scapegoating. I realized that what I'd grown up with wasn't normal, it was toxic. I learned that love without respect isn't love. It's control. Still, no matter how far I went, some part of me remained tethered to that old house. Not by affection, by unfinished hurt. I knew I wasn't ready to confront it, but I also couldn't fully let it go. And then came the phone call. Claire Mason's birthday is this weekend, Mom said in that cheerful but clipped tone that always made my stomach tighten. He'd love to see you. I almost laughed. Mason didn't care if I showed up. He only cared about the optics, like always. I'm really busy, I replied. There was a pause. Then the guilt punch. It's just one afternoon. He's your only brother. What kind of message does it send if you're not there? I wanted to scream. What kind of message did it send when you ignored me for 20 years? But I didn't. I never did. I swallowed the bitterness and said, fine. Even after everything, I still caved, still tried to keep the peace. I packed a small overnight bag, not because I planned to stay, but because a hotel felt safer than sleeping in that house. Looking back, it's eerie how clearly I remember that drive. The sun was setting. I was listening to an audiobook about trauma recovery. My hands were clenched on the wheel the whole way there. My mind kept telling me I was strong. Now I was an adult. I could leave if I needed to. But trauma doesn't vanish. It lingers in your bones, waiting to be triggered by a familiar voice, a slanted glance, a too-tight hug that says I'm still in charge. That's why when I parked in front of the Weston house and saw the string lights in the backyard and the crowd of expensive cars in the driveway, I already knew something would go wrong. I just didn't know it would be that bad. And if you've ever returned to a place you escaped, hoping it might be different this time, tell me in the comments. Was it? Or did it remind you why you left in the first place? I pulled into my parents' driveway right at 2 p.m. The party had officially started, and already the entire street seemed overtaken by Mason's guests. BMWs, lifted trucks, and luxury SUVs lined up like it was some kind of car commercial. Every detail was calculated to impress the red, white, and blue streamers along the porch railings, the classic rock playlist echoing from the backyard, the aroma of steak and bratwurst on the grill. I took a deep breath, looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and whispered, just survive the afternoon. As I stepped out, I noticed the familiar red Range Rover parked near the front Masons. Of course. He had insisted on that car the moment he turned 28. I remember Dad saying it's a reward for his leadership at the firm. Meanwhile, I was paying off student loans with tutoring jobs and using public transportation because my Honda had finally given up. I walked to the door and rang the bell. Mom answered. She gave me a quick, lukewarm smile and an air kiss that didn't touch my skin. Her eyes scanned my outfit: navy blouse, gray slacks, hair tucked back. You look nice, she said flatly. You passed inspection. That was her joke. I didn't laugh. She ushered me in quickly. Everyone's out back. Mason's already opened most of his presents. Of course they hadn't waited. The living room was filled with tissue paper ribbons and expensive packaging. A smartwatch, designer cologne, a sleek new camera, and on the kitchen island sat a printed photo of a brand new jet ski taped atop a wrapped box the size of a mini fridge. That one's from us, Mom said proudly. We're having it delivered next week. I couldn't stop the flash of heat that spread through my chest. For my 29th birthday, just 3 months ago, I received a generic Visa gift card in the mail with a note. Hope you can treat yourself to something small. I had. I'd used it to buy groceries. I slid my own card containing $100 in cash onto the corner of the gift table. The gesture felt small, invisible, like I was handing someone a thank you note for a crime scene. But I didn't come to compete. I came to endure. We walked through the house toward the backyard. The new deck was the centerpiece expensive Brazilian hardwood, varnished to a glossy shine built around the pool like a showroom piece. I remember Dad bragging about it over the phone last month. Cost nearly $18,000, but worth every penny. Mason deserves the best. Deserves. That word echoed as I stepped onto the deck. About 30 people were scattered across the space, mostly men in polo shirts and Ray-Bans holding craft beers laughing too loud. I recognized a few faces from high school guys who had once made my life hell and now looked like aging frat boys who never quite grew up. I counted maybe 4 women total, all standing off to the side, talking in low voices. I made my way toward them like a moth to a cooler flame. Mason spotted me first. He was in the middle of a dramatic story, arms flailing beer in hand, sunglasses perched on his forehead. His eyes lit up not with warmth, but with performance. Well, well, look who decided to show up, he shouted. Heads turned. Claire the ghost, he added with a grin, walking toward me with exaggerated swagger. I thought we lost you to Indiana forever. I forced a polite smile. Happy birthday, Mason. He pulled me into a hug that lingered too long, squeezing a little harder than necessary. When he let go, he turned to the crowd. Don't worry, guys. She's not here to lecture us. Probably. Laughter. I wanted to disappear. Mason turned back to the group, launching into another story about how he closed a deal with a handshake and a beer, while Dad worked the grill like it was a stage. I grabbed a water bottle from the cooler and found a seat near the fence. I could handle this. Just a couple of hours, then I'd leave. Simple. But as the afternoon wore on, the tension in the air shifted. The laughter got louder. The stories grew more pointed. And eventually, inevitably, Mason started reminiscing, and I became the punchline. Hey, he shouted over the crowd. Remember when Claire thought the neighbor's dog had rabies? She locked herself in the house for a week. Man, she used to be such a freak. I froze. Someone shouted, Didn't you switch her shampoo with Nair once? Tyler, one of Mason's friends, burst out laughing. Oh yeah, Patchy Claire. Her hair looked like a plucked chicken. The group howled. I stared down at my drink. My hands trembled. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, to not make a scene. But inside, I was 13 again, humiliated, powerless, surrounded by people who enjoyed my suffering. I stood up. I was done. But Mason wasn't. Leaving already, he slurred, stumbling in front of me. Come on, Claire, loosen up, just one drink, for old time's sake. I stepped back. I have a long drive. I'm heading out. He leaned in, close breath, reeking of alcohol. Still so uptight. Still can't take a joke. He said it like an insult. But for me, it felt like a challenge. And something in me cracked. Because this time I wasn't staying silent. Have you ever been mocked by someone who knew exactly where to cut you, who laughed as the room joined in? Share your moment below. Someone else might need to hear they're not alone. My name is Claire Morgan, and that afternoon wasn't just the moment my brother humiliated me. It was the last time I let my family define my worth. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream or throw my drink or storm off like a reality show meltdown. Instead, I walked away, calm, steady, and silent. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. On the drive back to Indianapolis, I didn't play music like I usually do. I needed the quiet. I needed to sit with the echo of Mason's voice, the laughter of people who'd never known me, and the realization that for nearly 3 decades I had played the role they'd cast me in. The awkward sister, the sensitive one, the disappointment. But what no one in that backyard knew was this. I wasn't just tutoring high school kids anymore. I wasn't just scraping by. 6 months earlier, I had launched my own online education platform. It started as a modest service to help students prep for college entrance exams. But I had a knack for the content, a way of connecting through short-form videos, live sessions, and downloadable plans that actually worked. And to my surprise, it took off. By the time Mason was mocking me at his birthday, I had nearly 18,000 paying subscribers across 4 states. My monthly revenue, $72,000. I had silently become the most financially successful person in that backyard, and no one had a clue. I'd kept it quiet for a reason. Part of me didn't want the attention. Part of me thought maybe if I stayed small, they'd love me better. But the other part, the one that had sat through every insult, every backhanded compliment, every ignored birthday, knew the truth. They didn't want the real me. They wanted the version that made them feel better about themselves. 2 weeks after the party, I got a text from Dad. "Hey Claire, Mason said you left kind of suddenly. Everything okay?" No apology, no acknowledgement, just a casual poke like I'd forgotten to take out the trash. I didn't reply. A few days later, Mom emailed me, "Sweetheart, we hope you're doing well. Mason's been promoted. He might get a spot in the partner track. We're so proud. Thought you'd like to know. By the way, we're thinking of doing a little family getaway to Clearwater Beach next month. Want to pitch in for the Airbnb?" That was the final straw. Pitch in. I hadn't even been invited to the planning call. I wasn't asked. I was expected. Expected to contribute. Expected to clap from the sidelines. Expected to play the same role I always had. So I wrote back, calm, firm, clear. "Thanks for the update. I won't be joining the trip, and I won't be contributing. I've decided to step back from family obligations for now. It's become clear that my presence isn't valued beyond what I can offer. I'm focusing on the people who genuinely see and respect me." It took me 30 minutes to hit send. Then I turned off my phone. That night I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea and crying. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life I felt free. Free from the need to explain myself. Free from the guilt they'd hung around my neck since I was old enough to notice the differences in treatment. Free to define myself without their lens. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself: no more shrinking. No more playing small so others could feel big. No more showing up where I wasn't wanted just to prove I deserved to exist. If you've ever walked away from a family that refused to see your worth, if you've chosen peace over proximity, drop a comment below. Your story might be the lifeline someone else needs to take their first step toward freedom. And if this story resonates even a little, if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, don't scroll past. Tap subscribe, join this journey, and let's rewrite what belonging means together. I didn't expect silence. I expected anger, guilt tripping, maybe even a surprise knock at my door, but instead they vanished. Not a call, not a text, not a passive-aggressive email, just silence. It was almost funny how quickly they erased me once I stopped performing. Weeks went by, then a month, then another. I didn't chase, I didn't explain myself again. I poured everything into my work and my small, loyal circle of friends, people who laughed with me, not at me. People who checked in when I was quiet. People who didn't need me to shrink for them to shine. Then one cold Thursday morning in late October, something unexpected happened. An email popped up in my inbox. Subject line: request for media interview, NPR. I blinked, read it again and again. Turns out one of my live virtual workshops had gone viral on TikTok, an edited clip about breaking down student loan myths and how to budget smarter in your 20s. It struck a nerve. Overnight, it hit 2.2 million views. Comments poured in. Young adults tagging their friends, teachers sharing it, college kids saying, "Why weren't we taught this in high school?" NPR wanted to interview me as part of a segment on millennial money moves. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, and I laughed. Not because I didn't believe I was worthy, but because just 4 months ago, I was standing in my brother's backyard being mocked for still doing tutoring. Now I was building a brand, a movement, a platform that mattered. I said yes to the interview, and the next week I was on air sharing my story, not just about finances, but about boundaries, about how silence can be survival, about how walking away from the people who built you doesn't mean you're broken. When the interview aired, my email exploded, not with family, but with strangers. Hundreds of messages, some from 18-year-olds confused by FAFSA, some from 40-year-olds finally setting financial boundaries with their parents, some just saying, "Thank you for saying what I never could." But the message that hit me hardest, a simple DM on Instagram. "Hey Claire, I listened to your interview on my way home from work. I haven't spoken to my dad in 3 years because he always made me feel like I was never enough. Hearing your story made me realize I'm not alone. Thank you." I read that message 5 times. Then I cried, because that's when I realized this was bigger than me. This wasn't about Mason, or my parents, or the Clearwater trip. This was about every person who's ever sat at a family table and wondered if they were invisible. About every girl who was told to keep the peace while being broken apart. Every son who kept the lights on for people who never said thank you. Every daughter who left family dinners feeling like a burden. We don't talk enough about the quiet pain of being erased while standing right in front of people. We don't talk enough about what it means to grieve the living, to mourn the version of family we wished we had. But maybe it's time we start, because in that silence there's power. In the walking away there's healing. And in our voices, our real, shaky, honest voices, there's a kind of freedom they never prepared us for. I wasn't broken, I was just unclaimed. And now I was claiming myself. One story, one lesson, one brave no at a time. The interview changed everything, but not in the way I imagined. I didn't wake up to fame or fortune, no Hollywood agent, no instant six-figure brand deal. What I got was something far more powerful: clarity. 2 weeks after the NPR segment aired, my old life came knocking again. Not metaphorically, literally. I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, laptop open, sipping lukewarm coffee, when I heard a knock at my front door. I froze. No one ever knocked. I opened the door, and there he was, Mason, my brother. He looked different, smaller somehow. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes avoiding mine. "Hey, Claire," he said, voice low, "can we talk?" I stared at him. 1,000 emotions surged. The shame from that backyard conversation. The sting of his laughter. The months of silence. The way he vanished the second I said no. And now what he wanted, a heart-to-heart. I didn't move, just stood there in the doorway, one hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. He cleared his throat. "I saw your interview. Mom sent it to me. Said you sounded different. Grown up." I almost laughed. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I forgave him, but because I needed to hear what he had come to say. And maybe deep down, a part of me still wanted to be seen not by the world, but by the brother who used to chase me around the backyard with a Nerf gun and promise he'd never let anyone hurt me. He sat on the couch. I stayed standing. He began. "I didn't realize I was hurting you. I thought I was just teasing, being the big brother. But watching you speak like that on the radio, hearing how you've been doing this all alone, it made me feel like the worst kind of jerk." I didn't say anything. He shifted in his seat. "Mom and Dad, they don't really get it. You know that. They think success has to look a certain way. And I followed that script, and now I'm miserable. The house, the car, the mortgage, the dinners with people I can't stand. And you're out here building something real." That hit me. He looked up. "Claire, I was jealous. I still am." Silence again. But this time it didn't feel hollow. It felt honest. "You were the brave one," he continued. "You walked away. I didn't even notice until the noise stopped." I finally sat down. And in that moment something shifted. Not a full reconciliation. Not a cinematic hug with swelling background music. But understanding, and that was more than I ever expected. He left after an hour. No promises, no big plans. Just a quiet "I'm proud of you" at the door. And for the first time in years, I believed he meant it. That night I stared at my phone for a long time. The texts from strangers. The silent thread from Mom still unread. Then I opened a new note and wrote one sentence. "Just because they can't love you the way you need, doesn't mean you don't deserve it." I wish I could say that after Mason's visit things got better. That his acknowledgement opened the door to healing with the rest of my family. That maybe they saw me now. But that would be a lie. If anything, it made things messier. A week after Mason left, I got a group message from my mother. One of those performative family updates she used to send out when I was still pretending to be included. The subject line was classic mom important family announcement. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity got the better of me. The body of the message read, "Hi everyone, exciting news. Your father and I are renewing our vows this fall. 35 years of marriage. We're throwing a big party at the house-catered open bar string quartet. The works. Hope to see all of you there. Love, Mom. P.S. Claire. I heard your NPR thing. You sounded so passionate. Maybe keep things light at the party." I reread that last sentence over and over. Maybe keep things light. It was like she couldn't help herself. She had to dim me, even when pretending to include me. As if I were a liability at her wine-soaked tribute to a marriage that frankly had always felt more like a power structure than a partnership. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking under her words. Then I clicked reply all. "Thanks for the invite. I won't be attending. Hope it's everything you want it to be." That's all I said, and I meant it. That message, short, sharp, and surgical, wasn't about them. It was about me. I was done being the family's shadow, showing up out of guilt, pretending their world still felt like home. I thought that would be the end of it. but then 3 days later my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened back, it was Dad. Claire, this is your father. Your mother's upset. I don't know what that radio segment was about, but whatever you're doing, cut it out. You're embarrassing yourself. And us. You've made your point. Now come home like a grown-up. My hands shook. Not from fear, from rage. After all these years, this was still the game. Minimize, control, command. They didn't hear my voice on the radio and think, wow, she's finally expressing herself. They heard it and thought, how dare she make us look bad. And that's when I understood they never wanted me to disappear. They wanted me to exist only in the way that made them look good. Decorative daughter, not disruptive truth-teller. So I did something bold. I forwarded the voicemail to Mason. An hour later, he replied with just 3 words, I'm so sorry. And for the first time, I knew he meant it not just for the past, but forever playing along. That night, I wrote a new piece, not for a blog or a post or a show. For me, it was called Inheritance. Not the kind measured in dollars or lake houses or jewelry passed down like trophies, but the kind we carry in our bones. The wounds, the silence, the parts of ourselves we inherit and then must choose to break or pass on. Sometimes choosing yourself means walking away from people who built the very bones you stand on. And that's not betrayal. That's survival. If you've ever had to choose between being accepted and being yourself, I hope you choose the latter. It might get quiet. But it won't be empty. I thought cutting off contact would bring silence. But what came instead was noise, so much noise. My aunt called. Then a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. Then another and another. Suddenly, I was the headline of the family group chat, the whispered scandal at every brunch and church function. They weren't calling to check on me. They were calling to fix me. Aunt Laura led with guilt. Your mom's just hurt Claire. You know how sensitive she gets. Cousin Rachel tried reason. It's just one party. You don't have to make a statement every time. Uncle Ben went full gaslight. You've always been a little dramatic, haven't you? And each call, each message felt like a rerun of the same broken movie, the same script they all read from. As if the worst crime I'd committed was honesty. But the thing that stung most, none of them asked what I needed. They just wanted me to play my part again. Be the quiet one, the good one, the one who never makes anyone uncomfortable. It was my therapist who finally said the thing I needed to hear. Claire's silence is not peace. It's just containment. That hit me like a train, because for years I'd confused the two. I thought avoiding conflict meant I was healing. But really, I was just putting gauze over a bullet wound, hoping it would stop bleeding if I held still long enough. I decided to do something radical. I shared a clip from my NPR segment on my public social media. Not just my professional page, my personal one. The one where all the family followed me. The one I used to censor myself on. The caption was simple. For years, I kept my voice down to keep others comfortable. I'm not doing that anymore. The comments rolled in. Some were supportive. Others weren't. Mom left a single comment, you're rewriting history. And for the first time, I didn't feel shaken. I felt clear. Because the truth is, of course, I was rewriting history. Not the history, my history. I was reclaiming it, reframing it. And if they didn't recognize that version of me, that was okay. They never really knew me anyway. That night, I received a private message from Mason. It was a photo. One of us as kids sitting on the dock by the lake. I was maybe 7. He was 11. He had his arm around me and we were both looking out at the water, not the camera. The message said, I remember this day. You told me you wanted to live on a boat someday and write stories. I'm sorry we all made you forget that. I stared at the photo for a long time. And I cried not from grief but from relief. Because even buried under all the noise, the real me had always been there. Waiting. So I made another post. This one just for her. To the girl on the dock, I remember you now, and I'm not letting go of you again. If you've ever had to unlearn the silence that was taught to you, as survival, know this. You're not being difficult. You're being real. And that's brave. And if this story touches something in you, something unspoken, something aching, maybe it's time to stop whispering. Tap, follow. Leave a comment. Say the thing you were told not to. Let's speak louder together. My name is Claire Morgan, and by the time I reached this point in my journey, I had become something I never thought possible, the architect of my own story. But let me take you back to the moment that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sky was heavy and low like the weight I carried inside. I was sitting at my desk drafting a presentation for an upcoming workshop on trauma-informed teaching, my new passion. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Mason. Can we meet? I want to apologize, really apologize. I stared at those words, trembling. Part of me wanted to slam the phone shut to delete his number and pretend this never happened. But another part, a quiet, hopeful part, whispered, maybe this is the moment. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. Mason arrived late, his hair longer and eyes tired. No jokes, no bravado, just a man trying to make amends. I'm sorry, Claire, he said, voice breaking. Not just for the party, but for everything. For the years I ignored you. For the times I made you feel small. I nodded, holding back tears. Thank you for saying that. He took a deep breath. I went to therapy while I was out on bail. It's been rough. I never realized how much pain I caused. For the first time, I saw him differently. Not as the tormentor, but as a man carrying his own brokenness. A man who had chosen a path that hurt others and himself. We talked for hours, about family, about responsibility, about forgiveness not as a destination, but as a process. But forgiveness wasn't the whole story. Because forgiveness doesn't erase trauma. It doesn't undo years of neglect. It doesn't bring back the years I spent questioning my worth. No, forgiveness is a choice you make for yourself, to free your heart from bitterness. And that's what I began to understand. I didn't have to forget. I didn't have to excuse. I just had to choose healing. That day, Mason and I agreed on one thing we would try. Not for the past, but for the future. If you've ever made peace with someone who hurt you, if you've taken the first step toward healing, share your story below. You never know who might need to hear that courage isn't forgetting, it's choosing to move forward. As our conversation ended, he looked at me with something like hope. I don't want to be the man I was. I want to be better for you, for myself. And I realized maybe I wanted that too. Not for the family I thought I should have had, but for the life I was building on my terms. That night, I posted a photo on my social media, a simple caption. Starting new chapters isn't about erasing what happened. It's about writing the story you deserve. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who had forgiven siblings, parents, friends who had taken steps toward healing despite the pain. Because the truth is, healing isn't linear. It's messy. It's slow. It's courageous. And it's always worth it. After that coffee shop conversation, I felt like I had taken a giant step forward. Mason's apology was a crack in the wall of years of silence and pain. But rebuilding wasn't instant. It was a process filled with uncertainty, questions, and sometimes setbacks. In the weeks that followed, Mason and I started talking more regularly, not just about family drama, but about life hopes and mistakes. Slowly, he opened up about his struggles with anxiety and addiction, things he had hidden behind his golden boy facade. It was the first time I saw vulnerability in him, and it was both surprising and healing. I shared my own journey, the trauma therapy, the nights of doubt, and the hope I found in helping others. Mason listened, truly listened, without judgment or interruption. It was the first time we connected as equals, not as siblings caught in old roles. But old habits die hard. One evening we had a heated argument. Mason called me out for not being family enough and questioned my decisions. I reminded him that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect and support. He slammed the phone down. That night I cried not because of the fight, but because I realized healing isn't a straight line. It's messy and sometimes painful. Still, I held on to the progress we'd made. During this time, my professional life blossomed. I was invited to speak at educational conferences, sharing insights on trauma-informed teaching and emotional resilience. The work was fulfilling. I felt like I was turning my pain into purpose. One day I received an email from a woman named Rachel. She introduced herself as a physical therapist specializing in neurological injuries. Rachel had read about my story and wanted to collaborate on a project for spinal cord injury survivors. I was touched. Connection was no longer limited to family. I was building a new supportive community. I met Rachel at a local rehab center. Watching her work with patients gave me hope. She spoke about neuroplasticity, the brain and spinal cord's ability to rewire and heal. Recovery is never just physical, she said. It's emotional, mental, spiritual. That resonated with me deeply. With Rachel's encouragement, I started volunteering at the center, mentoring patients who had suffered life-altering injuries. Sharing my story, listening to theirs, we formed a bond of resilience and courage. I also began therapy with Claire, a trauma specialist who helped me unpack the layers of family dysfunction. She said something that stuck: your paralysis is visible, but the emotional wounds, those take longer to heal, and they don't leave scars you can see. Together we worked through grief, anger, and the long journey towards self-love. My family still remained distant. My parents had moved to Florida, cutting ties completely. But the silence no longer hurt like it used to. I'd found peace not through reconciliation with them, but through acceptance of what was and what would never be. If you're navigating the complexities of family healing, if you're learning that sometimes love means setting boundaries, share your journey in the comments. Your voice could be the light someone needs. And if you found strength in your own scars, subscribe to join a community where we celebrate survival and growth, not perfection. The deeper I journeyed into healing, the more I realized how complicated forgiveness really is. It's not a single moment, it's not a switch you flip. It's an ongoing choice, a dance between holding on and letting go. One morning, as I sat by my window sipping coffee, Mason sent me a message. "I'm out of rehab, trying to stay clean. I want to be better, Claire. For real this time." I hesitated before replying. Part of me was hopeful. Part of me was scared. I'd been hurt too many times to believe promises easily. We started meeting every 2 weeks. Sometimes our talks were easy, sometimes full of tension. He'd open up about triggers, his fears, his regrets. I'd share my own struggles, some days with mobility, some days with loneliness. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. I found strength in community, too. The spinal cord injury advocacy group I joined became my second family. Twice a week, I visited the rehab center, not just as a patient, but as a mentor. I sat with people where I once was confused, grieving, scared. I reminded them and myself that progress is real, even if slow. One woman, Tara, became a close friend. She'd been paralyzed in a car accident 2 years prior and had learned to walk short distances with braces. "It gets easier," she told me one evening, "not because the pain stops, but because you learn to live with it." Her words were balm. As my physical therapy progressed, I started taking small steps with a walker, bracing against pain and doubt. Doctors called my recovery remarkable, but the emotional scars took longer to fade. I continued therapy with Claire, who helped me redefine family. "Family isn't always blood," she said. "It's who shows up when you're broken." That truth resonated. I stopped waiting for my parents to show up. I stopped hoping Mason would be the brother I wished for. Instead, I focused on the people who stayed the friends, therapists, and even new loves who saw me not as broken, but as whole. It was during one rehab session that I met Thomas, a physical therapist specializing in neurological recovery. Our professional connection slowly blossomed into friendship. He saw my scars, my wheelchair, my frustration, but never with pity, with respect. Over time, that friendship deepened. We laughed, shared hopes, and learned to trust again. In him, I discovered what healthy love feels like: acceptance, without strings, care, without judgment. And while my family's story remained complicated, I knew I was not alone. If you're learning to love yourself through pain or finding new family in unexpected places, please share below. Your courage might inspire someone still searching for theirs. And if you believe in the power of connection and growth, hit subscribe and join a community that honors every step of this journey. The years that followed were a journey of rediscovery. By the time I was 2 years out from that fateful day on my brother's birthday, my life looked very different from what I had imagined in my 20s. I lived in a wheelchair-accessible apartment on the ground floor of a quiet building in downtown Indianapolis, where the elevators had wide doors and the hallways were wheelchair-friendly. My home was no longer the cramped college dorm or the outdated rental apartment I'd moved into. After leaving my parents' house, it was a place of comfort and independence. I drove a specially modified van with hand controls, allowing me to get around town on my own schedule. Every trip reminded me of how far I'd come, not just physically, but emotionally. Though I still relied on a wheelchair for most of my daily mobility, I had regained sensation in about 60% of my lower body. With the help of custom leg braces and forearm crutches, I could take short, unassisted steps. It wasn't the effortless walking I once took for granted, but it was progress. Each time I stood at the parallel bars during therapy sessions or took a few steps down my building's hallway, I felt a surge of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim more than I'd thought possible. But the physical milestones were only part of my healing. The hardest work was internal. Therapy sessions with Claire taught me that trauma isn't just what happens to your body, it's what happens to your soul. For years, I had buried feelings of anger, grief, and abandonment beneath a mask of stoicism and determination. I'd learned to cope with the silent rejection from my family, but the wounds ran deep. Claire often said, "Healing isn't linear, Claire. You'll have breakthroughs and setbacks, and that's okay." And she was right. Some days I woke up feeling strong and confident, ready to face the world. Other days, the weight of my past felt suffocating, and the pain in my legs mirrored the ache in my heart. I learned to be gentle with myself on those days, to reach out to friends and therapists instead of retreating into isolation. Work became a new anchor for me. Unable to return to my previous job as an elementary school teacher, standing and moving all day was too difficult. I transitioned to a role as a curriculum specialist. From my home office, I developed trauma-informed teaching materials and conducted remote training for educators across the country. Knowing that my experience helped shape resources that might reach other kids growing up in difficult circumstances gave me purpose and meaning. I also became a peer mentor at the Spinal Cord Injury Rehab Center, where I once learned to walk again. Sitting with newly injured patients, sharing my story, listening to theirs, it was humbling and empowering. I saw myself in their eyes: fear, grief, uncertainty. And I reminded them what Tara once told me: it gets easier. Not because the pain disappears, but because you find new ways to live with it. My relationship with Mason evolved slowly. He was released from prison after serving 2 years for reckless endangerment. He wrote me letters from behind bars, some apologetic, some hopeful, none expecting forgiveness. Since his release, he's asked to meet several times, but I'm still not sure if I'm ready. As for my parents, they remain distant. I hear through mutual acquaintances that they moved to Florida, downsizing their lives after the lawsuit settlement. Their version of the story has been sanitized, painting them as supportive parents, caught in an unfortunate accident. But their narrative no longer holds power over me. I have learned that my truth does not require their validation. My pain does not need their recognition to be real. In the years since my injury, I have discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. Not just physical, but emotional and spiritual strength, a capacity to survive trauma and transform it into growth. 2 years after that devastating fall, I'm not the same woman who showed up at that backyard party desperate for approval. I am someone forged in fire, stronger in the broken places. Sometimes late at night, the grief still comes, the loss of abilities, the fractured family ties, the innocence stolen. But I am no longer alone with that pain. I have learned to accept help without shame, to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength, and to build a life defined not by what was taken, but by what I choose to create. If you're walking through your own healing journey, whether from physical injury or emotional trauma, know this: you are not alone. Your story matters, your pain is real, and your strength is waiting to be claimed. If this story has touched your heart, please leave a comment, sharing your own journey. Let's build a community where survival is celebrated and growth is honored. And if you believe in the power of resilience and hope, subscribe to stay connected. Together, we'll keep writing our stories one brave step at a time. By now, 2 years had passed since that day changed everything, the day my life was fractured physically and emotionally on that slick wooden deck. 2 years of surgeries, endless rehab, and learning to live with a body that didn't always cooperate. But more than that, 2 years of rebuilding my identity from the pieces left behind. The physical progress was undeniable, yet the emotional journey was more complicated and far-reaching than I'd ever imagined. I had to confront not just the trauma of the accident itself, but the years of emotional neglect and invalidation that had paved the way for it. Living apart from my family had been both a liberation and a wound. My parents and I had no contact after the legal settlements, and Mason's sporadic messages reminded me how tenuous our relationship remained. But I was no longer the frightened girl trying to win their approval. I was a woman who had found strength in her scars. I had become deeply involved in the disability advocacy community, an unexpected but welcome new family. Twice a week, I returned to the rehab center, this time as a peer mentor. Sitting with newly injured patients, sharing my story of pain and resilience, I saw reflections of my past in their eyes: shock, grief, anger, and the fragile hope for healing. One evening, as I watched a young man struggle to take his first steps with a walker, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't quite name. It was a mixture of pride and sadness, hope and loss. That moment crystallized my purpose to be a guide for others navigating the complex journey I knew so well. My relationship with Thomas, the physical therapist, who had become my close friend, and more continued to deepen. With him, I experienced a new kind of love, one that acknowledged my vulnerabilities and celebrated my strength. It was not about fixing or changing me, but about walking beside me hand in hand. Despite the progress, there were days when the past crept back in. Nights when pain disrupted sleep, memories of betrayal cut sharper than any physical ache, and the loneliness of broken family ties pressed heavy. Yet even on those dark days, I had learned not to isolate myself. I leaned on therapy, on my chosen family, on the community that understood. I let myself be vulnerable without shame. 2 years out, my life was far from the one I had imagined in my 20s, but it was rich in meaning and connection. I had earned every step, every word, every breath. And as I reflected on this journey, I realized the most profound lesson: healing is not about erasing the wounds, but integrating them into a story of survival and growth. My paralysis and family trauma did not define my entire life. They were chapters painful, but pivotal in the narrative I was still writing. I had found peace in accepting that some relationships would never be what I wished for, and that true family is often the one we choose, not the one we're born into. If you're watching this and you're carrying your own scars, visible or invisible, know this: your pain is valid. Your story deserves to be told, and your healing is possible. It was in the quiet moments away from the spotlight and the noise of other people's expectations that I truly began to understand what freedom meant. Freedom wasn't the absence of pain or struggle. It wasn't a perfect family, a flawless body, or a seamless past. Freedom was the courage to own my story, the good parts and the bad, the scars and the triumphs, the betrayals and the healing. 2 years had passed since Mason's cruel prank changed my life forever, since I'd felt the sharp crack of my body hitting concrete and the cold void where my legs once responded. In those years, I'd faced surgeries, rehab, emotional breakdowns, and breakthroughs. I'd built a life that looked nothing like what I'd imagined, but was authentically mine. I no longer sought approval from the family that had dismissed me. I'd learned that their inability to see my worth didn't diminish it. I was enough. I always had been. Every step I took with my braces, every small victory in therapy was a testament not just to physical recovery, but to inner strength. The emotional wounds from my childhood, the constant invalidation, the favoritism toward Mason, the silent neglect were still there. They were woven into the fabric of my being, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, I channeled that pain into purpose. My work as a curriculum specialist allowed me to help others navigate trauma. My mentoring at the rehab center gave me a community where I belonged. My relationship with Thomas showed me love's transformative power. Most importantly, I found peace within myself. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending the past didn't shape us. It's about embracing the full tapestry of our experiences and choosing how we define ourselves moving forward. I also learned the true meaning of family, not defined by blood or obligation, but by those who show up when it matters, who see your pain and respond with compassion, who hold space for your authentic self. My chosen family became my sanctuary. Friends who lifted me on dark days. Therapists who guided me through the labyrinth of grief. Patients who inspired me with their resilience. And Thomas who loved me not despite my scars, but because of them. As I look back, I realize that the woman I was before that party, the woman desperate for acceptance, silenced by fear and pain, no longer exists. In her place stands someone forged in fire, stronger in broken places, more authentic, compassionate, and aware of both vulnerability and power. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: you don't have to be defined by your trauma. Your pain is valid, but it doesn't have to be your prison. You are more than what happened to you. And you deserve to live a life filled with joy, connection, and freedom. If this story has touched your heart or sparked hope, please share your thoughts below. Your voice can light the way for someone else walking a similar path. And if you believe in the power of resilience and self-love, subscribe to join a community dedicated to healing, growth, and courage. Together, we'll keep writing our stories one brave step at a time. Healing is not a destination. It is a lifelong journey, a path marked by courage, setbacks, and growth. When I first faced the harsh reality of my injury and the fractured relationships that surrounded me, I thought my story was defined by loss. But over time, I discovered that my story is one of resilience, transformation, and hope. The pain I endured, both physical and emotional, taught me invaluable lessons about strength and self-worth. I learned that healing does not mean forgetting the past or pretending the wounds don't exist. Instead, it means embracing every part of ourselves, even the broken pieces, and allowing them to shape us into more authentic and compassionate human beings. Family is not always the people we're born to. Sometimes it's the people who stand by us when the world turns away. My chosen family friends, mentors, therapists, and loved ones became the foundation upon which I rebuilt my life. Through their love and support, I found a community where I could be seen and valued for who I truly am. To anyone watching this who is struggling with pain, rejection, or loss, know this: you are not alone. Your experiences are valid, and your healing is possible. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to claim your own story, to set boundaries, and to seek connection where it is healthy and genuine. This channel is a space for all of us who have walked difficult roads, but refuse to be defined by them. Together, we share our stories, lift each other up, and find strength in vulnerability. If you felt moved or inspired by this journey, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters here, and your story could be the light someone else needs. Remember, healing is not linear, but it is always possible. And every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. Thank you for witnessing my story. May your path be filled with courage, love, and endless hope.